The world first heard her voice as a crackle of pure, unadulterated teenage longing on a 45 RPM record. A voice that was both innocent and knowing, a siren call of beehive hairdos and whispered promises in the back of a Chevy. The song was Be My Baby, and the voice belonged to a young woman named Veronica Bennett, soon to be known to the world as Ronnie Spector. It's a voice that's become part of the very fabric of pop music, a sound so iconic it feels like it has always existed. We hear it in movies, on wedding dance floors, and in the quiet moments when we're yearning for something we can't quite name. But behind that voice, behind the eyeliner and the towering hair, lies a story far more complex and heartbreaking than the innocent romance of her songs. This isn't just the story of a rock and roll pioneer. It's a story of survival, of a young girl who soared to the highest heights of fame, only to find herself a prisoner in a gilded cage. It's the story of a voice that was almost silenced forever, and the incredible strength it took to sing again. This is the tragic and triumphant story of Ronnie Spector. To understand Ronnie, you have to understand the world she came from. Imagine New York City in the late 1950s and early 1960s. It wasn't the polished, tourist-friendly metropolis of today. It was a grittier, more vibrant, and in many ways more exciting place. The air was thick with the promise of change. The buttoned-down conservatism of the Eisenhower era was giving way to a new kind of youthful energy. This was the world of Spanish Harlem, a neighborhood bursting with life, a melting pot of cultures where the rhythms of Puerto Rican music spilled out of open windows and mingled with the soulful sounds of rhythm and blues. This was Ronnie's world. Born Veronica Yvette Bennett in 1943, she was a true daughter of this eclectic neighborhood. Her father was of Irish and Native American descent, and her mother was African American and Cherokee. This mixed heritage gave Ronnie and her sister Estelle and their cousin, Nedra Talley, a unique, almost exotic look that would later set them apart in the often homogenized world of pop music. From a young age, Ronnie was captivated by the sounds of the city and the stars she saw on the screen. She wasn't just a fan of music, she lived it. She would stand in front of the mirror, a hairbrush for a microphone, imitating her idol Frankie Lyman, the charismatic teenage lead singer of the Teenagers. She mimicked his every move, his every vocal inflection, his swagger. It wasn't just about the singing, it was about the performance, the emotion, the attitude. This early fascination with Lyman, a young black artist who achieved massive fame and then tragically faded, was an eerie foreshadowing of the highs and lows that would define her own life. The Bennett family was a close-knit, female-dominated household. Ronnie's mother and grandmother were the anchors, providing a stable and loving environment. They encouraged the girls' musical ambitions, seeing it as a way to keep them out of trouble and focused on a positive goal. It was in this nurturing environment that the seeds of the Ronettes were sown. Ronnie, her older sister Estelle, and their cousin Nedra started singing together at family gatherings, their voices blending in the kind of effortless harmony that only relatives can achieve. They called themselves the Darling Sisters, and they started performing at local hops and talent shows. They were young, they were ambitious, and they had a look that was all their own, while other girl groups of the era were projecting an image of demure, ladylike sweetness. The Ronettes were different. They were from New York, and they had an edge. They wore their skirts a little tighter, their eyeliner a little thicker, and their hair a little higher. They exuded a street-smart confidence and a raw, unapologetic sexuality that was both thrilling and a little bit dangerous. They were the bad girls of rock and roll, and audiences couldn't get enough. Their big break came in a typically New York fashion. They were mistaken for another act, and ended up on stage at the famed Peppermint Lounge, the epicenter of the twist craze. They quickly became a sensation, their energetic performances and unique look earning them a regular gig. It was during this time that they honed their craft, perfecting their harmonies and their electrifying stage presence. They were more than just singers. They were a complete package. Their look was as influential as their sound. Ronnie's iconic beehive hairdo, a towering creation that seemed to defy gravity, became their trademark. It was a symbol of their larger-than-life persona, a visual representation of their soaring ambition. But even as their star began to rise, the music industry was a treacherous place for a young, inexperienced group of women. They signed with Colpix Records, but the label didn't seem to know what to do with them. They released a few singles, but none of them captured the magic of their live performances. It was a frustrating time, a period of near misses and unfulfilled promise. But everything was about to change. A phone call came, a call that would alter the course of Ronnie's life forever. On the other end of the line was a man who was building a reputation as the most innovative and powerful producer in music, Phil Spector. Phil Spector was a boy genius, a wunderkind who had crafted a revolutionary new sound he called the wall of sound. It was a dense, orchestral, almost Wagnerian approach to pop music, layering guitars, pianos, strings, and percussion into a thunderous wave of emotion. He was a visionary, but he was also a deeply troubled and controlling man. When he saw the Ronettes, and specifically when he heard Ronnie's voice, he knew he had found the final piece of his sonic puzzle. Ronnie's voice was the perfect instrument for his grand productions. It had a raw, emotional quality, a slight tremor of vulnerability that could cut through the densest arrangements. It was, as she would later say, the voice of a New York street kid, but a street kid with a heart. The Ronettes signed with Spector's Phillies Records in 1963, and the result was pure alchemy. Their first single together was Be My Baby. From the opening drum beat, that iconic boom-ba-boom chick, the song is a masterpiece. It's a 3-minute symphony of teenage angst and desire, and at its center is Ronnie's extraordinary voice, pleading, yearning, and soaring with a passion that was almost overwhelming. Be My Baby was a global smash hit, and it transformed the Ronettes into international superstars. They were no longer just a New York sensation. They were a cultural phenomenon. They toured the world, their sassy style and powerful sound captivating audiences everywhere. In England, they were bigger than the Beatles for a time. A young Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones was so enamored with Ronnie that he reportedly followed her around like a puppy dog. They were the queens of the rock and roll scene, and Ronnie was their undisputed leader. But even at the height of their fame, there were dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The man who had made them stars, Phil Spector, was beginning to exert a suffocating level of control over their lives and their careers. He was particularly obsessed with Ronnie. He saw her not as a partner or a collaborator, but as his creation, the living embodiment of his musical vision. His professional control soon bled into a possessive and deeply disturbing personal obsession. Ronnie, young and in love with the charismatic, powerful man who had made her dreams come true, was initially swept away by his attentions. She saw his possessiveness as a sign of his deep affection. They began a secret affair, hidden from the public and from Ronnie's family. Phil was still married at the time, but he promised Ronnie the world. He promised her a life of glamour and a love as epic as the songs he wrote for her. In 1968, after his divorce, they married. Ronnie believed she was entering a fairy tale, but she soon found herself trapped in a nightmare. Phil Spector's mansion in Beverly Hills was not a home, it was a prison. A 23-room fortress complete with barbed wire fences, locked gates, and guard dogs. Ronnie Spector, the rebellious bad girl of rock and roll, became a virtual prisoner. Her life, which had once been a whirlwind of international travel and adoring fans, was now confined to the suffocating silence of Spector's estate. He controlled her every move. He forbade her from having friends, from speaking to her family, from even leaving the house without his permission. He took away her car keys and her credit cards. He wanted to isolate her completely from the outside world, to make her entirely dependent on him. The psychological abuse was relentless. Spector was a master of manipulation, of twisting reality until Ronnie began to doubt her own sanity. He would fly into terrifying rages, often fueled by alcohol and his own deep-seated insecurities. He was intensely paranoid, convinced that she was cheating on him, that everyone was out to get him. He installed an intercom system in every room of the house so he could monitor her at all times. He even, in a truly bizarre and macabre act, bought a gold glass-lidded coffin and kept it in the basement. He told Ronnie that if she ever tried to leave him, that's where she would end up. He wanted to break her spirit, to erase the confident, vibrant woman she had been and replace her with a timid, obedient doll. He did everything he could to destroy her identity. He forced her to dress in the style of the Ronettes, even though the group had long since disbanded. He wanted her to remain his creation, frozen in time as the girl who sang "Be My Baby." The musical collaboration that had once been so fruitful became another tool of his control. He discouraged her from recording, from singing, from doing the one thing that gave her a sense of self. He was jealous of her talent, of the love she received from her fans. He wanted her voice to belong only to him. He would torment her by making her listen to him rehearse with other singers he was considering to replace her. There were moments of physical violence, but the emotional and psychological torment was a constant gnawing presence. Imagine the terror of being a young woman thousands of miles from home with no one to turn to. Imagine being told day after day that you are worthless, that you are nothing without the man who is destroying you. This was Ronnie's reality for years. The world outside the mansion walls still knew her as Ronnie Spector, the glamorous pop star, but inside, she was just Veronica, a frightened young woman fighting for her sanity and her life. One of the most chilling and little-known stories from this period involves a rare occasion when Ronnie was allowed to leave the house. Phil had agreed to let her have dinner with her mother and some friends at a local restaurant. But his paranoia was so extreme that he made her go to dinner with a life-size dummy of himself, propped up in the passenger seat of her car. He wanted to send a message, both to her and to anyone who might see her. She was his property, and he was always watching. Can you imagine the humiliation, the sheer terrifying absurdity of that situation? It's a detail that sounds like something out of a horror movie, but for Ronnie, it was just another day in her gilded cage. Another story, one that Ronnie herself recounted with a chilling mix of horror and dark humor, was the time Phil adopted a set of twins, Louis and Gary, without her knowledge or consent. He brought them home one day as a surprise. He wanted to create the perfect family, but on his own twisted terms. Ronnie, who had always wanted to be a mother, was suddenly thrust into the role, but with no real agency. The boys were another way for Phil to control her, another set of eyes to watch her, another tie to bind her to him. The years of abuse took a devastating toll. Ronnie began to drink heavily, using alcohol to numb the pain and the fear. She was losing herself, her voice, her will to live. But even in the darkest moments, a spark of the feisty girl from Spanish Harlem remained. She knew she had to escape, not just for herself, but for her children. The escape itself was as dramatic and terrifying as a scene from one of her husband's overwrought productions. In the summer of 1972, with the help of her mother, Ronnie planned her escape. She knew she couldn't take anything with her. Phil would have noticed if her clothes or suitcases were missing. So, one night, she waited until he was asleep and she slipped out of the house barefoot, with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her mother was waiting in a car down the street. As they drove away, Ronnie looked back at the mansion, at the prison that had been her home for 4 years, and she didn't feel sadness or regret. She felt only the overwhelming, exhilarating rush of freedom. But escaping the mansion was only the first step. Escaping Phil Spector's shadow would be a much longer and more arduous journey. In the divorce settlement of 1974, Ronnie was forced to make a series of devastating concessions. She signed away all future record earnings and forfeited her right to any of her community property. Most cruelly, she was forced to give up custody of their adopted children. Phil threatened to have her killed if she didn't agree to his terms. She walked away from the marriage with a pittance, a used car, and her life. But she had also walked away with something far more valuable, her freedom and her name. She was Ronnie Spector, and no one could take that away from her. The years that followed were a struggle. The music industry had changed. The girl group sound was a thing of the past. Producers were wary of working with her, afraid of Phil Spector's wrath. She tried to launch a solo career, but she was haunted by the past. She was no longer the innocent girl who sang "Be My Baby." But she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be now. She was a survivor, but the scars were deep. For a time, it seemed as though her voice might be silenced forever, a casualty of a toxic love and a brutal industry. She played small clubs, sometimes to audiences that were more interested in the nostalgia of her old hits than in her as a contemporary artist. It was a difficult and often humiliating experience. But Ronnie Spector was a fighter. She had survived Phil Spector. She could survive this. The turning point came in the 1980s. A new generation of artists who had grown up listening to her music began to champion her work. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, who had modeled their own sound on Spector's Wall of Sound, invited her to perform with them. Eddie Money, a huge fan, wrote the song "Take Me Home Tonight" specifically for her. He wanted her to sing the iconic "Be My Little Baby" line in the chorus. At first, Ronnie was hesitant. She didn't want to be a nostalgia act. She didn't want to be defined by her past. But she realized that this was an opportunity not to relive the past, but to reclaim it. "Take Me Home Tonight" was a massive hit, and it reintroduced Ronnie Spector to a whole new audience. It was a triumphant comeback, a powerful statement that her voice was as vibrant and essential as ever. This comeback was about more than just music. It was about reclaiming her narrative. In 1990, she published her autobiography, "Be My Baby: How I Survived Mascara, Mini Skirts and Madness," or "My Life as a Fabulous Ronette." The book was a raw, unflinching account of her life, a courageous act of speaking truth to power. She laid bare the years of abuse she had suffered at the hands of Phil Spector, shattering the myth of their fairy tale romance. The book was a sensation, and it sparked a renewed interest in her story and her music. It also led to a protracted and bitter legal battle. In 1988, Ronnie and the other Ronettes sued Phil Spector for unpaid royalties. They argued that they had been cheated out of millions of dollars over the years. The legal battle dragged on for more than a decade. It was a grueling and emotionally draining process. Spector, still a powerful and vindictive figure, did everything he could to fight them. But in 2000, a New York court finally ruled in their favor, awarding them more than $3 million in back royalties. It was a significant victory, not just financially, but emotionally. It was a validation of their art and a public acknowledgement of the injustice they had suffered. However, the victory was bittersweet. A higher court later overturned part of the ruling, significantly reducing the amount they received. It was a stark reminder of the power dynamics that still existed in the music industry. The legal battles and the public revelations about Phil Spector's abuse cast a long shadow, but Ronnie refused to be defined by them. The later years of her life were a period of creative resurgence and personal peace. She remarried to her manager Jonathan Greenfield and had 2 sons. She found the loving, stable family life that had been so cruelly denied to her. She continued to record and perform, her voice now deepened with the wisdom and pain of her experiences, still capable of raising goosebumps. She released albums that were critically acclaimed, and she toured the world, playing to sold-out crowds of devoted fans. In 2007, the Ronettes were finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a long overdue recognition of their immense contribution to music. As Ronnie stood on the stage giving her acceptance speech, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. She was no longer a victim. She was a victor. She had taken back her voice, her legacy, and her life. The story of Ronnie Spector is a story of profound contradictions. It's a story of innocence and experience, of love and abuse, of fame and imprisonment. It's a story that raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of genius and the price of fame. Phil Spector was undoubtedly a musical visionary, but his genius was intertwined with a monstrous cruelty. Can we separate the art from the artist? Can we listen to the soaring romanticism of Be My Baby without thinking of the darkness that lay behind its creation? These are questions with no easy answers. Ronnie's story forces us to confront the often brutal reality of the music industry, particularly for women. She was a pioneer, a woman who dared to be different, who dared to be sexual and assertive in an era that expected women to be demure and compliant. But she paid a heavy price for her audacity. Her story is a cautionary tale, but it is also a story of incredible resilience. It's the story of a woman who was broken down but refused to be broken. A woman who found the strength to walk away from her tormentor and rebuild her life on her own terms. What is the ultimate significance of Ronnie Spector? Why does her story still resonate so deeply? It's because it's a story about the power of the human spirit to endure. It's about the importance of finding and holding onto your own voice, both literally and metaphorically. Ronnie's voice, that perfect, imperfect, heart-on-its-sleeve instrument, is her legacy. It's a voice that has been a source of joy and inspiration for generations of listeners. But her story, her survival, is also her legacy. It's a testament to the fact that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, it is possible to find your way back to the light. In the end, Ronnie Spector was so much more than the girl who sang Be My Baby. She was a warrior, a survivor, a true icon of rock and roll. She was a woman who lived through a tragedy that would have destroyed most people, and she came out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. She continued to sing, to perform, to share her story with the world, right up until her death from cancer in 2022. She spent her final years not in bitterness or regret, but in a state of grace and gratitude. She had found peace and she had found her voice again. And that voice, full of heartache and hope, of swagger and soul, will continue to echo through the ages. A timeless reminder of the girl from Spanish Harlem who dared to dream, who dared to escape, and who dared to sing her own song. Her life was a testament to the idea that no matter how dark the night gets, there is always the promise of a new day. And for that, Ronnie Spector will forever be our baby. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.